So how will the elections impact Filipinos in the United States and the Philippines as a nation? Joining us now is political analyst Dindo Manhit. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. How do you think did the Filipino Americans vote in this presidential election with many issues on their minds, particularly immigration, human rights, the COVID-19 response, jobs, and the economy?
I think, good morning, Rico. I think you have to look at Filipino Americans from two perspectives. I think it's generational. The votes will be shaped by generational issues. The older Filipinos, who tend to be more conservative, see themselves, I think, aligning more with the conservative values of the Republican Party. But I see that the younger ones is expected really to view things more liberal, and they will be affected by issues like immigrations, race, and so you'll see some differences in views.
So basically, it will be a split between Democrats and the Republicans for the Filipino Americans in this 2020 presidential elections. But also a key issue, Professor, is the future of undocumented Filipinos, particularly the DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, immigrants brought to the U.S. as minors. How critical is this for Filipino-American voters?
That's why I feel that I'm surprised, actually, except for the conservative views of certain Filipino migrants, to really look at Trump as their presidential candidate. Because as migrants, you would really see value of respect for some of these illegal aliens there in the U.S., that they will have an opportunity for their basic human rights be protected, and you will see the Democratic Party more open in terms of providing opportunities or a roadmap to address this issue of illegal migration.
And also joining us, Professor Manhit, is International Studies Professor Renato de Castro. Professor, thank you so much for joining us on New Day this morning. How do you think will Filipino Americans vote in this election, particularly with so many issues on the table, particularly what I mentioned to Professor Manhit, this DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals?
Well, there's no Filipino American vote. They're divided. Unlike, of course, when you talk about the Jews, the Jewish lobby, or the Polish lobby, they're divided. You know, I've been in the States, spent 5 years, depending, of course, on the orientation of those Filipino Americans. Generally, of course, those Filipino Americans who serve in the military, they're sort of conservative, in contrast, of course, to those who are educated. So there's no single Filipino American vote in the United States. When it comes to the issue regarding immigration, again, this is based on my experience. They don't care. You know, once they're there, they only think of themselves. They couldn't care less unless, of course, they could bring their relatives into the United States. That's the paradox. You know, once you're there in the United States, you want to basically put the wall against future immigrants, especially if they're illegal immigrants.
So basically, with the almost 2 million eligible Filipino voters going to the polls today, so it's going to be basically split into half.
Yeah, yes. There's no such thing as a Filipino-American vote. They're divided all over the states. That's why the Filipino Americans are called the invisible immigrants, because they are not very visible. They don't act like for example, the Jewish lobby or the Polish lobby. Or let's say the Japanese Americans. That's the nature. We're divided here. They're also divided there.
So, Professor Manhit, why isn't there a Filipino lobby?
I think there was a lobby, but it's really driven not by big Filipino communities, but at times focused simply on activities in Washington, D.C. itself. So we have not, as mentioned by Professor De Castro, that you need to really unite to be a strong lobby. And in this case, when you are seen as divided communities, it will not be a strong voice when you ask for policy. So what happens, I think, now is that there are groups or individuals who would have either engagements or connections with certain political parties or political legislators that provide them access to push certain Filipino-American issues. And in the end, it benefits the whole Filipino-American communities. But actually, as a whole, it's not as strong as you would like to expect, given the 2 million Filipino-Americans. That normally could be a powerful lobby. But something to point out, surprisingly, I've noticed that Joe Biden came out with an advertisement that is using Filipino language or Filipino philams. So maybe it's the first time that I saw a presidential candidate trying to target the philam communities in the Philippines.
So
in the United States.
briefly, professors, before we let both of you go, what will a Trump or a Biden presidency mean in terms of RP-US relations with President Rodrigo Duterte? Let's start off with you, Professor De Castro.
Well, if of course you have President Trump being reelected, I guess this will be business as usual. The personal ties between the two leaders will still be there. That basically, of course, saved the alliance when President Duterte was about to unilaterally abrogate the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Visiting Forces Agreement, and of course EDCA in October 2016. That was in a way saved first by the intervention of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Then, of course, President Trump's personal approach. I don't think that personal approach will be there.
What about Biden?
Once you have,
Joe
Biden,
Professor? What about Biden if he becomes president?
Probably it's just be maintaining the alliance in the light of the U.S.-China strategic competition. But I don't think you will have that personal touch. You won't have that personal rapport between the two leaders.
All right, Professor Manhit, you have 30 seconds. Biden or Trump and the relations with Duterte?
Oh, I think if it's really Trump, it's really about status quo. So the personalist approach, very transactional. But with Biden, I also would like to remind everyone that key to his foreign policy is to reinvigorate democracy and renew economic security driven by democratic values. So that might affect certain relationship between the President Duterte and Biden. But in terms of security, I agree with Professor De Castro that key to this is really maintaining this alliance against security threats in the region.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on New Day. Professor Renato De Castro and political analyst Dindo Manhit.